Actualización de la Protección Internacional de las Denominaciones de Origen e Indicaciones Geográficas. Contamos en este panel con la moderación de Massimo Vittori, director ejecutivo de Origin, la organización internacional sin ánimo de lucro que representa los intereses de productores de productos con indicaciones geográficas a nivel internacional. Nos acompaña también la señora Alexandra Grazioli. Ella es directora del Registro de Lisboa, Departamento de Marcas, Dibujos y Modelos Industriales e Indicaciones del sector de marcas, dibujos y modelos industriales de la OMPI. Annabel Boissonnade, asesora comercial de la Delegación de la Unión Europea en México. Jean Rodesch, asesor principal del director general de la Oficina de Propiedad Intelectual de la Unión Europea. Y Nancy Omelko, abogado asesor senior en Políticas y Asuntos Internacionales de la Oficina de Patentes y Marcas de los Estados Unidos. Le cedo la palabra entonces a Massimo Vittori. Massimo, muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias. Es un placer. Muchas gracias por la invitación. Voy a hacer la moderación en inglés. Como tenemos todo el panel, se va a hablar en inglés. So, dear colleagues, dear friends, it's really a pleasure for me as Director of Origin to moderate a panel on the latest developments on protection at the international level. This is a little bit the core business of Origin. You know, we were established 20 years ago to campaign for more robust protection. So it's really a pleasure. So today we have the opportunity really to look at the issue from various points of view. So I propose to change a little bit the order of speakers in order to start from the national level, to see what's going on at the national level through the US presentation, then the European Union as a regional level, then to touch a little bit upon bilateral agreements, which is also another important component, through again the European Union, and finally the multilateral, plurilateral level with WIPO. Okay, so I'll keep it very short. With no further ado, I'll give the floor to Nancy Omelko from the USPTO to see the situation at the national level in the US. Let's see.
Thank you, everyone, and I think we're going to pull up my presentation. Yep, here we go. So at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, we have competency over patents, trademarks, copyrights. We share that competency for copyrights with the Copyright Office, but within the jurisdiction of trademarks, we also focus on geographical indications. And here are some of the ones that we have registered in the US. We have the Roquefort cheese from France. That's been registered for many, many decades. We also have Thai Royal Silk, which was registered probably as a certification mark maybe 20 years ago. Stilton cheese from the UK. We also have Parmigiano Reggiano, and our famous Idaho potato is also registered in the US Patent and Trademark Office. But at the center of all this, you can see tequila, which, as we heard earlier, was registered and protected in the US Patent and Trademark Office about 8 years ago. And it is a certification mark indicating regional origin. And I'll go into that a little bit as we go on. So GI protection in the United States sometimes is questioned. Do we really protect geographical indications as they do in other countries where they have sui generis standalone systems for geographical indications? And the answer is yes. In fact, we have been protecting geographical indications for decades, even before the TRIPS agreement came into being, even before we joined the TRIPS agreement, which is the first time we actually hear the words geographical indications in a treaty. The Lanham Act, the Trademark Act in the United States, goes back to 1946. And what happened back then was we had certification marks and collective marks. in our legislation. And for example, a certification mark indicating regional origin is tequila. And as part of that registration process, we had to have the application being filed, where the tequila product was actually going to be produced, what the standards were for that type of production, what the area of production was, and so forth. So pretty much what you see in the regulations, for example, the European Union, when you look at the standards of production that are necessary to protect geographical indications there. We also have protection for geographical indications as collective marks, and the example I'm giving is Pecorino Sardo. Pecorino is a common name for a type of cheese. It's a used milk cheese, sheep's milk, Sardo being from Sardinia. So the geographical important part of the term is Sardo, and we've protected that in the United States. We also have protection as trademarks. We have Ethiopian coffee. This coffee has been used in the United States for many, many decades, and in order for the Ethiopian coffee growers, the government of Ethiopia, to secure a trademark in the form of a geographical indication, they had to show that consumers in the United States were aware that this coffee was only coming from the regions in Ethiopia. So here is our relevant section of the Trademark Act that I mentioned earlier. Section 4 of the Trademark Act says that certification marks and collective marks indicating regional origin, that's the geographical component of this. The U.S. equivalent of GIs are found in Section 4 of the Trademark Act, and it requires the region to be defined and standards of production to be included in the application process. There is also another part of the Act, which is Section 2 of our Act, which says you cannot register a geographical term unless it is distinctive, unless it doesn't just indicate a geographic area, but it indicates a specific area. And that is exempted under Section 4 and Section 2. So geographical terms are registered if they're certification marks. So we thought when we were deciding whether we were going to go to a sui generis system, what to do with what we had currently. And we found that all the things we really wanted in a system, publication, providing notice to everyone, as well as existing appeals and oppositions and cancellation proceedings, and the fact that GIs would be treated on the same footing as trademarks was also important to us. We have substantive examination. The application goes through an examining attorney who will determine whether it's registrable, and that is because it is either not a common name or there's no prior rights that are preventing it from doing that. So there is the distinction we make in the United States is that a geographical indication is something that is protectable, whereas a common name for a product is something that is just could be used by anyone and should be left to be used by anyone. We have various levels of evidence for genericness, and a lot of it comes down to what do we see in the supermarkets, especially for products. We also look at various international standards, such as the Codex Alimentarius, which is an international body that sets standards for particular cheese and meat products, for example. Brie, Camembert, Edam, Gouda, Provolone, and Havarti are all within that that Codex Alimentarius, which means that they are common names for products. They're not specific to an area. We had two recent board decisions. One was Prosecco, where we found that the U.S. consumer realizes that it doesn't just come from the Italian region, but also can come from other countries such as Australia, And also Gruyere cheese, again, we get products, Gruyere products from many, many countries beyond France and Switzerland. And then we also have a system for making sure that everyone knows the difference between a GI and a common name. So in those GIs that have components like Pecorino Sardo, I mentioned before, we make sure that there is information in the record to show what's protected and what isn't. And here are some examples. Brie de Meaux, Brie is the common name, Provolone Valpadana, Edam Gouda Holland. The underlined parts are actual names of cheese products. And then we also, as I mentioned, want to make it very clear as to which is protectable or not, so we have statements in the record as to what is a protectable part of a compound GI. And that's it for me. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for having me come to speak here.
Thank you very much, Nancy, and for showing us how it works, the system with trademarks, collective marks, certification marks in the US. Also, at Origin, we have both US members, which are protected as certification marks, and also non-European members that have protection in the US through the certification mark. So, you know, we have been exchanging, you know, with you on, by the way, we have a dialogue with several trademark offices around the world, including the European Trademark Office, to see how we can improve the monitoring of trademark applications in conflict with GIs or in conflict with certification geographical marks. So we value this dialogue, and we hope that we can improve the system just to reduce the legal expenses for groups. That is something that it's really dear to us, because we know that GI groups not all the time have a lot of financial resources, you know, to deal with a lot of oppositions, or even observations can be extremely expensive. Okay, now let's move to the European Union with the latest developments with Jean Rodesch, who is a special advisor to the director of EUIPO, but many of you probably know him for his past in the industry of wines and spirits.
Yes. First of all, I would like, first of all, I would like to pay tribute to the Conseil Regulador, because you are celebrating your 30th anniversary. At the office, we do the same. So that's a good excuse for another drink of tequila, I think, dear President. And, and the second aspect is a little bit what it is, the office in charge of intellectual property. It was created first for trademark registration. After that, we obtained from the EU legislator more and more competence. And last year, we've been asked to be in charge of a new piece of legislation related to geographic indication for craft and industrial product. Craft product, in fact, there is a lot of craft product in Mexico. And we have now a role also on agri-GIs. I'm going to talk about the two new legislation related to GIs. And you may wonder why the office is now going to be in charge of geographical indication. Well, in fact, we helped the Commission, specifically the Agri Department, since 5 years to do what we call pre-examination, meaning we are receiving the file at the office and we examine if all the element within the technical file is in line with the EU legislation. And when we have done this, it takes 4 or 5 weeks. We send it back to the Commission, who is going to review our interpretation based on broader element of the legislation. Let me talk about the agri reform. I'm not going to enter into the detail of the reform. That's a summary of it, because it's an element related to the agri field and not IP. Just to mention that for the first time there is a reference of sustainability in agri-GI legislation. The same thing, there is a demand, in fact, to the office to protect geographical indication in domain names, like .eu, for example. And the role of the office will be, first of all, to take the register. We are going to manage the register of all the geographical indication, including, of course, foreign geographic indication, foreign meaning not from the 27 member states of the EU. We are going to, as I said, police domain name, and specifically .eu, but maybe other. And an important thing you have to be informed is that in the past we had 3 legislation on geographical indication, one for food, another one for wine, and a third one for spirits. Today we will have only one, except for wine, where some aspect will be still run by the so-called wine organization system. We will continue what we did for the past, helping the Commission in international cooperation. We do a lot of things, including training, etc. And we have received a very important mission on behalf of the Commission, which is to work with the 3 countries here. I'm not going to ask you if you have recognized the flag, Georgia, Moldavia, and Ukraine. They are candidates to enter into the EU, and we've been asked by the Commission to prepare the 3 countries to integrate the European system. Yes, on top of that, within the office, we have an observatory specifically dedicated to counterfeiting problem. They are producing reports, but also they help to train custom officer authorities in charge of enforcement, and that's also an important role of the office at the EU level. The new legislation on craft, it took 20 years to adopt this legislation, mainly because in the member states we have only 17 of them who had a national legislation. The others, they did not have one. So some of the member states said, why do we have to have a EU legislation? But there was a pressure from some member states, but also members of the parliament, to adopt this new legislation. So it's done now. The scope is very easy. Everything which is not agri. The system is normally 2-stage, a decision at the level of the national country, and another one which is going to be at the office. And as I said, for this craft and industrial GI, we are totally in charge of the examination. Well, in fact, I just said, without having the slide, what it is in the slide. Okay. And to end my presentation, this second legislation on craft and industrial GI will be only implemented next year in December. But in the meantime, we are preparing ourselves to be ready the day when the legislation will enter into force. For example, we have created within the office a specific department in charge of GI. And we are starting to train our people. Well, they are already trained on agri-GIs, but of course the new legislation is new for all of us, and we expect to be ready for the 1st of December 2025. I did in 10 minutes. Excellent. I was excellent.
As usual, Jean, very good. So now, thank you very much. I think these are important developments. First of all, as you said, craft and industrial regulation in the EU, it's very important for EU businesses in the craft and industrial sector, which can now have a recognition, but also it's important vis-à-vis third countries, Mexico, India, China, Colombia, a lot of craft GIs that would like to be protected in the EU and also to be fully compliant with the Geneva Act. And also from the agri point of view, I think that the reform contains some interesting improvements, including the use of GI as ingredients, which is very much dear to tequila, although it doesn't go as far as we wanted at origin. I think it goes in the right direction, and also in terms of increasing the protection in the domain names. Of course, as European Union reform can only deal with country code top-level domains of the European Union, like the .Italy, the .France, the .Spain, .Portugal, Sweden doesn't cover the generic top-level domains, but that's another issue. Okay, so we'll now move to bilateral agreements. Actually, let me tell you a short story here. Like, Origin was based in Geneva, decided to have the headquarters in Geneva because of do campaigns at the WTO, but at some point around 2008, all the negotiation on GIs moved from the WTO because it was clear that it was impossible, at least in the foreseeable future, to reach an agreement on GIs, and they moved up the hill, thankfully still in Geneva at WIPO, on the reform of the Lisbon Agreement, and on bilateral agreements, which European Union has several, but also other countries in the world, Colombia, India, Switzerland, Jamaica. There are a web of bilateral agreements. So let's see this from the point of view of the European Union with Annabel Boissonnade from the European Union delegation here in Mexico.
Merci. Okay, so I'll stick to the title of this panel, which is supposed to focus on protection only, so I'll dive straight into it. As you all know, in the European Union, GIs matter. This is something that it's unavoidable. And the good news is that it doesn't, I mean, we're not alone on this. We've seen in terms of evolution how more and more trading partners are adopting a similar legislation or taking into account this instrument, and within the region this has helped us to conclude some very successful free trade agreements. But anyway, in terms of protection, there is, I mean, we've just seen how we deal within the internal market. Thank God Jean covered that part, because otherwise it would be impossible to stick to the 10 minutes. And so I'll dive straight into what we do outside our borders in terms of protection. So what do we do outside? So we're basically, we're on two different speeds here, which are both necessary and complement each other. So let's start with the multilateral side of things, where as you know, we've, thanks to when we transited from the Lisbon Agreement to the Act of Geneva, the European Union is finally, as a regional party, been able to become a full member. So this is on the multilateral front, but I won't delve into it because I'm sure I don't want to take over your space on this one. So just to mention that on the multilateral side, this is what I would call the slower lane, yes, because things take time. Everybody has to agree. But on the upside, obviously, once an agreement is reached, you have the scope is larger in terms of partners being involved. So let's jump to the high-speed lane, which, coming back to what Massimo was saying, are our bilateral agreements. So we've been signing a number of FTAs over the last decade, if not more, where, in my personal opinion, I think FTAs are the best illustrative example of how much GIs matter to EU member states and European Union, because we've seen certain circumstances where, for example, a member state can actually block the ratification of an FTA due to, sort of a disagreement on the level of protection of the IPR chapter related to GI. So this is how important it is. It's not just an economic matter. It's got a political angle. So coming back to what are the advantages of FTAs over, let's say, the multilateral system, is that we attain a TRIPS plus kind of protection, which goes way beyond, as a high level, basically, of protection than we would have on the multilateral front. And it also enables us to have some tailor-made solutions to the individual names that are protected within European Union. Some examples, I mean, the agreement that I know best would be the one with the modernized agreement that we're soon going to sign with Mexico, I mean European Union, Mexico, where we have a very ambitious IPR chapter, including for GIs, where in all of our FTAs, to be honest, we have a system where we have a list. We have a list of specific names. The number of terms which will be protected within that list will vary from one FTA to another, but the level of protection is more or less the same that we achieve in all those FTAs. And if we compare them with the other FTAs within the region, for example, including the northern region, I would say Canada, the level of protection is is obviously not the same as the one that we have within the European Union, but it's getting there. So it's a very positive sign. So we have the lists. So a specific list of names that are protected and listed for both sides, obviously. And we also have some tailor-made solutions to specific cases. So we have a wide variety of solutions. So it could be like, let's talk about cheese today, because there's a good example for the different solutions that we have. For example, we have the phase-out. In the Mexico agreement, we got to phase out for feta cheese of 8 years, if I remember correctly. Then we have also, for example, the prior users solution, where, for example, Parmesan is one of them. And it's also, this prior users provisions are strictly, let's say, coordinated with the provisions stating that you must avoid confusing the consumer on the labels. And we also have other solutions like, well, I think there's only one of them in the Mexico agreement on coexistence, which will be the case for the Manchego cheese, where we allow, again, coexistence is allowed as long as there is no confusion to the customer on the label related to the origin. Another advantage of the high-speed lane, let's say, of FTAs would be the fact that producers are more inclined to monitor that market, given that there is an economic interest here. This is an important point. It doesn't mean necessarily that non-FTA partners are at a disadvantage. If their system has a high level of protection and enforcement, there is no need for monitoring. But general tendency is that you will find that GI representatives will tend to monitor the markets in where we've negotiated an FTA. So I'd like to come back to I'd like to conclude with the initial comment that I made on the evolution of the positive evolution that we've seen with our trading partners on adopting GI legislation and obviously recognizing and protecting European GIs. This is it's good news because it means we're more and more moving away from those quite controversial expressions that you can read in the press, things like GIs are the equivalent of exporting protection, or that we're encouraging gastro-nationalisms. These are expressions that nowadays can make us laugh and not cry. That's a good thing. And we've also seen countries which 20 years ago were not expected to be using the GI system, and like, for example, China, where the EU even actually managed to negotiate an agreement specifically on GIs, recognizing a number of protected terms. And I must admit that I'll conclude with this. Sorry, that the best news today, apart from having to sing the mañanitas this evening with some well-deserved tequilas, would be basically to be grateful for the presence of our North American friends here on this panel dedicated to how to improve the protection of GIs. So it's, I would say, an encouraging sign. Very happy. There we go.
Thank you. Thank you, Annabel, for showing us how the bilateral EU agreements work with the list, with the analysis, the legal analysis, and then the protection. And now we will conclude with the Geneva Act, with the Lisbon system, which includes the Lisbon Agreement and its improvement in the Geneva Act, with Alexandra Grazioli, who is the head of the Lisbon Registry. Alexandra.
Let me first start this presentation by thanking CRT for the invitation and also for the warm hospitality we received since we arrived. I knew a lot about tequila thanks to the extremely good work that Fernando is doing in Europe. So he let us really understand the product, but seeing now in the field the hard work of everybody to create this wonderful product and its quality, it really created another dimension for me, so thank you. So let's now move to the Lisbon system. So the Lisbon system is really a tool that can be used by GI producer worldwide, provided the country joins that system managed by EUIPO, to obtain protection internationally. And this is very important, as you know, in order to have that protection, in order to have this product well known by consumer, and to be sure that they have this original product at their disposal, and for producer also to benefit from that IP rights they are protecting. So how to do it worldwide, in addition to have a bilateral treaty? The Lisbon system is that solution, and several producers here present, including producer from Mexico, already benefit from that protection through the Lisbon system. So as said by Massimo, the Lisbon system is governed by two versions of the same treaty, the Lisbon Agreement. Mexico is a member of the Lisbon Agreement, negotiated in 1958. And we have now the new version of that agreement, the Geneva Act, which is now growing, really having a big interest worldwide. And as you see now, most countries are joining the Geneva Act, and we hope to count soon also more countries in this region joining this Geneva Act. And I will try to explain to you why the system has now won a new interest with the Geneva Act by EUIPO member. First, the system has become more global with the revision because it integrates the definition of geographical indication, which, as you know, is a bit broader than the definition of appellation of origin. So handicraft products have their full space now in that system. Also, we open the system to intergovernmental organization. European Union, we heard, joined the system. The African Organization of Intellectual Property also did it 2 years ago. The system is also now much more flexible than before. It recognizes a different type of protection that country can choose to protect GIs, so including certification, collective mark, in addition to sui generis system, but it remains effective, very strong protection as it had before, and also modern with different safeguards introduced. Also a recognition that when some terms are generic, they should not be protected as geographical indication. But the main advantages of the system is, and it remains as before, is accessibility. So instead of trying to obtain protection in different jurisdictions, having to follow the rule of these different jurisdictions, thanks to a single registration in EUIPO, producer can obtain protection in many countries, a single set of fees to pay, a single language to use. Spanish is one of the languages of the system, so less cost for producer to obtain that protection worldwide. Second, it's convenience, and keep in mind the Lisbon system is the only existing international system and international register existing for GIs. It covers since the origin all kind of product, food product, agriculture product, but also natural product. And you see here example of Mexican appellation of origin protected through the Lisbon system. The system provides also very effective protection. So the level of the protection corresponds to the standard you heard from the European Union, for instance, Mexico also legislation. So really a protection against any usurpation and imitation of your GIs. The system also provides an unlimited protection, so no need to renew every 10 years, for instance, as you have with trademark, the protection in order to keep it. There is also a protection against the term to become generic, so when one member decides to protect the GI, it cannot become generic anymore in that country. And this was a very central point in the negotiation, even of the Geneva Act. And finally, being part of the family of the GIs protected under the Lisbon system, it increased also the reputation of those GIs. System is easy. The only condition when the country of origin of the GI joins the system to obtain protection is to have the GI protected at national level, and is based on the title, national title of protection, original in the case of EU, that you can apply for the GI in the other member and potentially obtain protection in all members of the system. What is important to know is that every member has the possibility to decide also if it protects or not the GIs. So there is full sovereignty of every member to decide if they protect or not on their territory the geographical indication. And this they can do within a 12-month period. The system, as I mentioned at the beginning, is becoming really global. More than 70 countries are now covered by the Lisbon system. And you can see also the countries that joined the Geneva Act recently, in addition to those who are members of the Lisbon Agreement. And just to mention again that in the region, only Peru, for the time being, have joined the Geneva Act. So we hope soon to count more countries. And globally, we see a big interest. We are working in EUIPO with different countries interested to join. But why? I think, to conclude, I would like to go on that element. Why now countries are so much interested to join the Lisbon system and to obtain international protection for GIs? I think this is very much linked to some discussion we had in the previous panel, sustainability. Geographical indications are really seen as a tool that can foster sustainable development of region, provide better revenue for the producer, but also have some positive spillover effect indeed in the region. And since tomorrow is World IP Day, and the theme of this year is sustainability, or UN SDG, how IP contribute to UN SDG. It's just marvelous to be here to see how in practice, indeed, a GI like tequila is really contributing to sustainability. Just to mention that EUIPO is more and more engaged in having projects with local community. So we are helping community to protect their GIs, but then also we move more and more to help also after registration this community to better manage this intellectual property right in terms of commercialization, but also governance of the GIs. And the example again of tequila is really seen by other countries as something they want to learn more, because they were very impressed of the result achieved in the region. So we may come back to you to ask for having also your expertise in other countries. And I finish by mentioning an example based on the last visit of our Director General to Mexico. So he had the opportunity to meet the community of producers of Seta de Cajonos. And so based on that visit, we launched a project to assist that community to better manage now that intellectual property right. So we help them indeed to implement this regulation, the book of specification. We help them also to develop a commercialization strategy with also logo and how also to work together in that region in order to have a more successful geographical indication. So we hope soon to hear more and also see more of that Seta de Cajonos in Mexico and abroad. So with that, I conclude my presentation and I give you back the floor, Massimo.
Thank you, Alexandra. And a couple of considerations on the Lisbon system. Let me make a bit of promotion for Origin as well. You mentioned the strong protection. Actually, in Article 11 of the Lisbon Agreement, there is also the protection for the use of the name of the GIs in a different category of products, including services. And this was an amendment that was pushed by Origin during the diplomatic conference, because we have several members experiencing also the use of the GI on services to exploit the reputation. Of course, it's not absolute protection when it's used on different categories, including services, is for when this attempt of using the name is to exploit the reputation. And second consideration, I think we are in Mexico, we have some national authorities. I think as Mexico is a part of the Lisbon Agreement, would be important also to be now part of the Geneva system, of the Geneva Act, to benefit from those improvements in terms of protection. I think that's a common message we can launch today. So we are definitely on time. We still have time for questions. Just let me make a little comment about the journal before we launch the debate. I think I'm very happy and proud of this panel, because normally when the EU and the US sit together talking about GIs, normally there is a bit of trouble, a bit of discussion. Today it was very nice, very cordial. I think it's important, but I would like to underline also the diplomatic and protocol skills of the Consejo Regulador del Tequila, because they put Alexandra, who is an international civil servant, but also a Swiss national, in the middle to be like, the neutrality. So I think it worked perfectly. So we have to be proud of that. But aside from jokes, I think we'd like to open the debate with a question, from me to all of you, and then we'll open the debate from the floor. We have talked about some improvements in the protection at the international level. What are, in your views, the remaining challenges for the next 10, 15 years, and how can we actually work together as a global IP and GI community to address them? So I'll start from my left, Annabel.
Thank you. Okay. Briefly, I'll state probably two obvious and one less obvious challenge that springs to mind. First one, which the key word you mentioned is remaining challenge, yeah? So it's nothing new, where we tend to focus our efforts on evocation, yeah? For when it comes to GIs. So we included obviously in our FTAs and obviously legislation, but this is something, it's an issue which is harder to tackle than other more obvious, like imitations and things like that. We know within the European Union, based on our experience, that it ends up in the courts usually, and it's on a case-by-case basis. But it's quite a complex issue, and this is something where probably need to focus more on labeling aspects when it comes to that. A second one, which has been brought up quite a few times, is the issue of genericity or genericness, I don't know what's it called. So this is also something the European Union is pretty close to its heart in terms of fighting these I can't call it a growing trend, but it's an issue for especially the dairy sector, I was mentioned earlier. And I would just mention a less obvious one that I mentioned, referring to the need to raise awareness among producers on not only on the basics as what GI is, the challenges, the reality of what's behind in terms of developing a GI, but also the competitive advantage of the different IP rights that are available, and in terms of how a GI, the protection of a GI, how much more protection, how much more efficient protection it will grant the product, or the term protected, sorry, compared, for example, to a collective trademark, or I could even say the certification trademark. So that would be the three ones I would like to raise.
Thank you. In terms of protection, from an international point of view, I have the impression that with the Geneva Act, quite an interesting level of protection has been achieved. Improvements are still possible, but where I see the biggest challenge, it's now more on the fact that geographical indication has really now been opened to every country all around the world. But it still remains a relatively new IP right in many countries. So the challenges I will more put on that focus on technical assistance. Technical assistance to authority. They understand the interest of protecting GIs, they understand the benefit, but perhaps sometimes on all the technicality, they are still not at the level. So more assistance and more need of cooperation towards authority, but also towards producer, because often what we see is that there is registration of GIs, but then how to fully manage the benefit of that protection. How really to use that branding tool to be more successful on the market, how to secure also the full collectivity benefit from it. So I think I will put the challenge at that level.
Thank you. I guess from the US perspective, We don't see the common name problem the same way the EU does. We are a population of immigrants from Europe and other countries, but when we came to the United States, our farmers were desperate to eke out a living in new and terrifying conditions, and so they brought with them the expertise that they had learned in Europe, and they also used the same terms that they used in Europe, and they just continued to do that without any ill intent. There was no intellectual property rights back in those 200 years ago days. And so we think that those producers who have built a brand name using this common word that has been a GI in the EU, but a common name in the US, should continue to be able to preserve that right to sell their products around the world. And so I think that is the major problem. We see the diminishing markets. Every time an EU FTA goes into effect, there is a market lost usually for our dairy producers. One positive thing I think that we have seen is at EUIPO, we are now going to have the balance of common names and geographical indications through a staff person who will be responsible for answering to preservation of those common names. So we look forward to further discussions there. Thank you.
So first of all, I'm not surprised that we are with our friends from the USPTO and WIPO, because we have, first of all, we have a committee of different IP office, the US, the Canadian, the Chinese, and the Korean, and we do exchange a lot of information and also action sometimes, especially on counterfeiting product. And with WIPO, we have a work program which is not yet adopted. It's a question of minute, I'm sure. So I'm not surprised, as I said. And to answer your question, Massimo, of course, the craft and industrial GI is a piece of legislation which is brand new. So one of our role will be, first of all, to inform craftsmen and industry who are about this new legislation and the opportunity, but to do the same also abroad, outside the EU, and that's why we have a network, and Carlos, my colleagues from IPK, they are in the room. They will be obliged, with pleasure of course, to promote this new legislation, which is of interest, as you said, for craft people and the industrial GI, either if they have already a recognition, or to help them to create the GI, the craft GI, and industrial GI. So I think that's my comment.
Still have 10 minutes for question from the floor. Is there a mic circulating? Yeah. So I see already somebody in the third lane. Please introduce yourself and ask the question.
Thank you for being with us. I have two questions, Massimo. I don't know if it is available. One is for Jan. I have heard from some colleagues in the European Union that are insisting that the new rules about the inclusion of crafts in the geographical indication systems are only for folk crafts or handcrafts. So my question here is, what's happening with, for example, Solingen or some indications as that are not handcrafts? And if, I don't know if it's possible for you to elaborate a little more about this. That's the first question. The second question is for Nancy, and I would love to be very careful, very diplomatic. And here is the question. Does the USPTO has any information? Do you have you seasoned the market in order to learn if in the US are more producers interested in using GIs. For example, I know that Idaho potatoes, for example, or Sonoma wines, or Napa Valley wines, that the producers are interested in the system, but I don't know if you have learned, if you have some information about in the general public in the US, if they are interested or if they are not interested in the GI system. Thank you.
Well, I will disappoint you because we are not producing the legislation. We are implementing the legislation. So the question you raised was taken on board by the European Commission in a piece of legislation, but at the end it's the Parliament and the Council who is adopting the final text. And this specific problem was put out of the final text. So we cannot do something if we do not have a piece of legislation. So that's it.
Thank you for the question. Yes, as far as wineries such as Napa Valley, which is protected in the EU, for example, and Willamette Valley, I think those are the only two GIs we have protected in the US. From the U.S. They do have lots of information about the tax revenue for not only the local area, but also for the state of California, for the U.S. government, etc. And the fact that everybody stays in that area because they love it, ecotourism, everything about that GI is working for them. We have Idaho potato, of course. But the other, so what has happened in the United States is not so much the way it developed in Europe, which is that you have these regions noted for particular types of products, other than the ones that are pretty prominent, maybe 5 of them in the US. Instead, the trademark system was used, and meaning the brand was used. So it would be the brand of potatoes, the brand of wine. And nowadays, we're even finding out that it's not even the brand so much, but the packaging, the modern look of the wine bottle, for example. So things are really changing with these new generations. It's not so much where it comes from, but the reputation of word of mouth. Somebody is going to buy this product because it's good, not so much where it came from. And in our competitions, there were cheese competitions where our producers, won first prize in the Parmesan, category. So it's not a question of quality. I don't think, we do have the U.S. Agricultural Department that has grants for, promoting and developing geographical indications and renowned for those particular areas of protection. But there aren't that many, I have to say. Thank you.
Another question from the floor? No, you can wrap up. Okay, so I think just to wrap up a little bit, the conclusion, the main learnings, I think it's we can say that the progress over the last 20 years have been major in terms of geographical indication protection, with a large number of countries around the world adopting sui generis systems, with the protection of GIs via bilateral agreements, with the Lisbon system, the Geneva Act, which attracted a high number of countries, 52 jurisdictions, I think. But there are still some issues. We see that, for instance, in the United States, the emphasis on protecting geographic indication through collective marks, certification marks, which is a system, I understand it's compatible also with the Geneva Act, but of course some issue of common names remain. I think the major, if I can put a synthesis on that, the major point of disagreement is that how do you consider the genericity? I mean, the genericity in the US, from the US perspective, they would like to see it seen extended in other countries. From the perspective of the European Union, it's more on an IP-based concept in which genericity is only considered at the local level, country by country, case by case, which is a little bit the IP approach. So I think on that we can close. I think there needs to be also a solution on that, because it's important also that from the US farmers' perspective, or those interests are taken into account. We believe at Origin that the GI can be, although can be protected to certification mark, but it's interesting to insist and focus on the locality, on the authenticity, because it's something that the market is looking for. The consumers are really eager to know. That's why, you know, the tourism linked to the geographical indication is booming, because it's not just buying a product, it's more an experience, a full experience on the authenticity of a territory. And also, if we speak about, if you want to intercept a little bit the movement of sustainability, through GIs you can communicate that those products cannot be delocalized, that primary producers are well remunerated. So I think there is a big narrative behind that, and I think that's a pity that because of that disagreement on genericity, the US doesn't open and doesn't really invest to give a perspective to the farmers. But I think this is something that has to be, sort of agreement has to be found, and I think events like this one helps to close, you know, the gap as much as possible. I think it will take more years, but at some point I'm sure that, you know, some agreements will be found. But let me conclude by saying that our president mentioned it today during the opening, in the keynote, at 3:30, in front of the mural, here at the camera, we'll present the results of our 2024 GI Trend Survey. It's a survey that Origin does since 2022, every year, on the major economic trends affecting the major GIs, the 30 major GIs in the world in terms of export and revenues, turnover. And this year, the trend topic is on legal expenses and legal infringement, so it's going to be very interesting. I invite all of you to come, and also by showing our approach to GIs, which is quite universal, I would say, at Origin. Also in that trend panel, in the 28 GIs, we have at least 3 American certification marks that are also part of the GI community. So I invite all of you to be there, and thank you very much for your attention. A big round of applause for our speakers. Thank you very much.